Lithium powers your electric car batteries. Electricity travels to homes through copper wires. And our smartphones wouldn't work without rare earths. They're everywhere, but often too little thought is given to these critical resources. And now they're at the heart of a geopolitical storm. With China's dominance in critical minerals holding the United States and other countries to ransom, the stakes couldn't be higher for global supply chains. I'm Divya Gopalan, and you're watching Connected on Taiwan Plus. To understand how these elements have become intrinsic to our daily lives and why countries around the world are now scrambling to secure supplies, we are joined by Ernest Scheyder, a senior correspondent with Reuters and the author of the book, The War Below: Lithium, Copper, and the Global Battle to Power Our Lives. Thank you very much for being on the program, Ernest.
Hey, it's great to be with you.
I want to start with the premise of your book. Why did you decide to call it The War Below?
Well, in my day job as a journalist, I started out writing about the oil and gas industry, and I can tell you that there are people that have very strong opinions, one side or another, on oil or gas. But about 7 or 8 years ago, I switched my professional focus to look at critical minerals. And I realized right away that the average person across the planet just didn't give that much thought to critical minerals or to mining in general, unless it came to putting a mine in your backyard to get copper or lithium or nickel or cobalt or any other critical mineral. And so people, they just don't want a mine in their backyard, metaphorical or otherwise. And so that really, to me, brought up these big questions. If this energy transition is important for our planet, if we need these critical minerals to power laptops and cell phones and electric vehicles, they have to come from somewhere. So we're going to need more mines. But mines are deeply unpopular all across the planet. People just don't want them near where they live. And they also don't want processing facilities. And so to me, that brought out a core question here. What are the choices we're willing to make if we want this transition? And to me, that's the core theme here in The War Below. That was the conflict that I wanted to push into.
Given the supply crunch we're facing right now and all the conversations around critical minerals, your book couldn't have been more timely. And I believe it is now printed in Chinese and available here in Taiwan.
Yes, so it is out in Taiwan and it is available. It's also out in the United States and many other countries across the world. The story, as I mentioned, pushes into this idea of choice. And really what I want is the average person to understand critical minerals more and to learn the questions that they need to be asking policymakers in their governments across the planet. You know, it's not too much of an understatement to say that critical minerals really are the new oil. We know that control of oil and natural gas really defined the 20th century economy. And on the flip side, here in the 21st century, whoever controls the production and processing of these critical minerals will control this century's economy. So these conversations are extremely important.
Could you give us some context into how critical these critical minerals are for our viewers here to really understand why this is a big issue for so many governments right now?
Yeah, it's sort of a wonky term, right? Critical minerals. It can seem a little confusing and myopic. But really, when I think of what critical minerals means, it's basically a mineral that you need that you might not have readily accessible in your country or have steady supplies from a partner or an ally. And so things like lithium or nickel or cobalt or rare earths are considered critical by many governments across the world. Copper, for example, is actually not considered critical by the United States government, but it is by the European Union. And so you can sort of see just maybe a bureaucratic distinction there in definition. But what is important is that all of these materials are the building blocks for our new electrified economy, and very few of them are mined in many places across the world, and even fewer of them are processed in many countries across the world. So that's given an edge to countries that focus on that mining and that processing, or maybe more specifically, countries that have the mineral endowment to be able to focus on mining, and countries that have the processing capacity or have focused on the processing there. And so just think, if you're a country without large reserves of, say, copper or lithium, and you don't have processing for copper or lithium, you obviously consider those two extremely critical for your economy. So where you get them matters. And if you don't have access to them, you're going to have to go shopping in the global market for them, and that might increase your costs. But at the end of the day, that nickel or that cobalt is still the same nickel or cobalt depending on how it's produced. And so it's actually up to us as consumers to demand more from companies and mining companies out there to produce their top products at these high standards. I have a chapter in the book that talks about mining certification schemes, and don't go to sleep on me. I know that sounds a little sleepy, but what it actually is, it's so important for us because we are the consumers that will buy the products made from these critical minerals. And because there's no global standard for mining, there's a mining certification scheme known as IRMA, or the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance, that was founded in part by Tiffany and Company, the jewelry company, who obviously buys a lot of metals as well for rings and watches, etc. And this was a way for the mining industry to be prodded to have better standards across the planet. So for me, it was a fascinating way to look at how we as consumers, the purchasing power of the products that we buy every day, really can influence the mining industry for the better. So I thought it was a really interesting anecdote to include, and it's a very meaty chapter in the book.
And that's something we'll keep coming back to as we talk about how countries are trying to develop their critical mineral supply, their own critical mineral supply. So let's take a look at the top global producers of the 18 critical minerals. China dominates the list, producing 12 key critical minerals, including rare earths. Africa's Democratic Republic of Congo is the leading producer of 2 critical minerals, that's cobalt and tantalum. And when it comes to processing of some of the most essential minerals like copper, nickel, aluminium, lithium, cobalt, rare earths, manganese, and natural graphite, China dominates the production charts again. Now, the other global producers in that list are Chile, Indonesia, Japan, Argentina, Finland, and Russia. The production concentrated market, which refers to centralized manufacturing or production activities, is also dominated by China, while Myanmar, Zimbabwe, and South Korea are in that exclusive list of top producers of critical raw minerals. So as we can see there, Ernest, China controls a significant portion of the world's critical mineral supply. How did it come to this?
Right. First off, you're right. They do dominate a lot there. I want to really lean into that one of those graphics right there and point out that it's mostly processing, not necessarily mining. So, of course, once you take the rock out of the ground, you can't put it into a Tesla. You got to do something with it to be able to make the battery that goes into a Tesla. And China shrewdly realized about 40, 50 years ago that the processing was really the important part of this critical mineral supply chain. And it could see the entire global economy going in that direction. So what did China do? It invested in, first off, person power, recognizing that education and university training was going to be key to train the next generation of mining engineers and metallurgists and many other related fields. That was sparked in part by scientists that were trained in the United States. One of the lead rare earth scientists in the world in the 1950s and 1960s got a PhD from Columbia University in New York, then moved back to mainland China to help develop the industry there. And so China went to work not only with education, but also investing in physical processing facilities and encouraging manufacturers to co-locate in mainland China in order to build out manufacturing supply bases by saying, hey, you can have cheap access or reduced cost access to many of these critical minerals to build your products here. It was a very, very shrewd way of focusing on a market that the country could see was growing importance across the globe. Meanwhile, other countries across the planet just focused less on critical minerals or just less on mining in general. It wasn't considered a sexy industry to go into in the latter part of the 20th century and the early 21st century. In fact, in the United States, if you were to ask the average person what the mining industry involved, they might say coal or some kind of related petroleum-based industry. It just was not one that young people wanted to go into. So at the same time, you had this huge interest in places like mainland China. You had an atrophy of the skill set in the United States. And so here we are today with China being the largest processor because it realized the importance of this, whereas many countries across the world, including the United States, are struggling to boost their own minerals processing.
And at the same time, I suppose China can bypass a lot of the environmental standards or requirements that are required in many other countries when it comes to building an industry. So what's the U.S.'s position when it comes to being able to produce its own supply of critical minerals?
Well, we've seen a lot of efforts by Washington in recent years to boost not only mining, but processing of critical minerals. You saw the Inflation Reduction Act passed under former President Joe Biden a few years ago that tried to use tax credits and other U.S. government financial incentives in order to encourage more mining and processing. But there was a paradox there because many companies wanted to increase production in the United States, but there was this tension around permitting and environmental concerns. And so you saw a lot of indigenous tribes, you saw a lot of local conservation communities, and a lot of environmental groups really push back against a lot of the production and processing of those critical minerals in the domestic United States. I think those are conversations that are extremely important and worth having. It is a reality that did slow down some efforts in the United States. Some of them have moved forward. Some are still in limbo. But that is the reality of where the U.S. is today. Under President Trump, who took office roughly 6 or 7 months ago, we have seen efforts just in the past month to boost production of rare earths. The United States government basically infused a giant financial aid package into a company known as MP Materials, which is the largest rare earths miner in the United States, and is working to boost its processing as well as production of rare earth magnets. Rare earth magnets are devices basically that take power from a battery and turn it into motion. So think of the thing that makes your cell phone vibrate. It's a rare earth magnet. China controls the manufacturing of those magnets as well right now. And that was an industry actually that was invented in the United States, but was basically was exported to mainland China in the 1980s. And so there are efforts, as I mentioned, under President Biden and now under President Trump to try to increase production here. But these things take time. You know, it's like turning a giant ocean liner. You don't just turn it on a dime. And so many of those skill sets have been lost, and they need to basically be relearned. And so time will tell whether many countries in the West, including the United States, can boost their own domestic production and processing of these critical minerals.
I want to come back to something you said earlier in our conversation. And you said, whoever controls the production of essential critical minerals really will control the 21st century economy. Can you explain?
Sure. In short, these are essential for our way of life. I mean, Divya, just think about the camera and the microphone with which we're speaking to each other right now, the thousands of kilometers long of wiring that are allowing us to have this conversation. Just think about the many, many, many millions of other conversations like this every single day, powered by laptops and other electronics. They're all built with critical minerals. Our entire economy relies on these critical minerals. Just think about the AI boom. It requires giant computer server farms all built with critical minerals. Where these critical minerals come from matters. And so, you know, we have seen some consultancies out there warn that in the 20th century, we saw wars over oil. They warn that maybe in the 21st century, we could see wars over copper, which just seems mind-boggling when you think about it. But I think it underscores just how important copper and many other critical minerals are for this energy transition. And I'll point out that countries that have these natural resources in the ground are also waking up to their potential. Whereas maybe in the 19th or 20th century, if you were a resource-rich nation, maybe you had a company come in, take that resource out, and then export it for processing elsewhere. So you as that host country might never see the financial benefit, or maybe not as large a financial benefit as you could. But now we're seeing a lot of countries that have either a lot of nickel or lithium or other critical mineral on the ground that are waking up to their potential and prowess and saying, hey, wait a minute, we should see the long-term benefits. So if we have a lot of lithium in the ground, say like Bolivia, which has the world's largest lithium resource, they're demanding that there be an entire electric vehicle supply chain built in their country. That doesn't exist right now in their country, but you can't have electric vehicles without lithium. So I think it goes to show you how in this one example, you've got a country saying, hey, wait a minute, you can't succeed without what we have. So let's have this entire economy be built where we are. And I think you're going to start to see a lot more of those as this century develops.